Welcome to The Curse of the Virelan, an epic sci-fi adventure where humanity meets alien destiny. Join Dorian, a daring human smuggler, and Alyssa, an alien princess cursed for centuries, as they navigate a galaxy filled with danger, secrets, and ancient technology. Together, they'll fight to break a curse that's bound her people and uncover the truth about their intertwined fates. This is a thrilling HFY story of courage, freedom, and unexpected alliances. Sit back, relax, and get ready for a journey you won't forget. The stars flickered outside the battered viewport of the ship as it docked at ASTRO Station X, a place where time itself seemed to bend and twist. It wasn't just a spaceport. It was a black hole for secrets, deals, and danger. For Dorian Blake, a smuggler who made his living by slipping through the cracks of the law, it was the perfect place to disappear. But today would be different. Dorian wasn't here to disappear. He was here to strike a deal that would make him richer than he'd ever dreamed. Wrapped in a secure case at his side was a treasure so rare, so powerful, it could change the balance of the galaxy. The celestial orb. As Dorian stepped onto the station's cold, metallic surface, the air was thick with the stench of too many species packed too closely together. Their voices, a discordant symphony of greed, desperation, and shady deals. The market bustled around him, alien merchants haggling, criminals whispering in shadowed corners, but none of it mattered. Dorian was on a mission. He'd wait for his contact, unload the orb, and then vanish into the blackness of space. But fate had other plans. His gaze caught hers across the crowded marketplace. She stood there like a dream, a woman who didn't belong in this world of chaos. Tall, with skin like the midnight sky, her white hair woven with strands of shimmering light. And then, those eyes. Golden and fierce, they locked onto his with a power that made his breath catch in his throat. For a moment, the universe seemed to stop. Time seemed to freeze. And then came her voice, soft and yet undeniably commanding. "You've looked," she said. "The bond is sealed." Dorian's heart slammed against his chest. What was she talking about? He didn't know her. He hadn't even spoken to her. But in that moment, he felt it. The overwhelming certainty that something had just changed. Something beyond his understanding. Before he could react, chaos erupted. Alyssa, the woman who had just branded him as her husband, was surrounded by armed guards. As they closed in, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Her golden eyes glimmered, and in an instant, everything around them dissolved into a swirling vortex of purple light. Dorian's stomach lurched as reality twisted. When it settled, they stood in an entirely different place. Luxury, panoramic views of the station from the outside. His feet were unsteady, his mind spinning. What just happened? He gasped, still trying to process the teleportation. Alyssa, unfazed, turned to him with a sly smile. "My people have a unique way of dealing with certain things," she said casually. "And you, Dorian Blake, are now bound to me. Welcome to the most unexpected marriage in the galaxy." Dorian staggered, trying to grasp what had just happened. His heart was still racing, his mind in a state of utter disbelief. He was no longer standing in the crowded marketplace of ASTRO Station X. Instead, he found himself in what appeared to be a luxurious suite, surrounded by glass walls that revealed the vastness of space beyond. Alyssa was calm, as if nothing had happened. She walked across the room with an elegance that seemed almost unnatural, her shimmering white hair trailing behind her like starlight. Where are we?" Dorian's voice cracked, still trying to make sense of the sudden shift. Alyssa turned and smiled, her golden eyes glinting with an unreadable expression. "Somewhere safe," she said softly, her tone almost playful. "Now, we can talk without the distractions of that market, and you can stop trying to run." "I don't understand," Dorian muttered, shaking his head. "I didn't agree to anything. You can't just what?" Alyssa's voice was sharp, cutting through his words. "You looked at me. That's all it took. Eye contact among my people is a bond, a sacred one. And now you're bound to me, Dorian Blake, whether you like it or not." His mind raced as he processed her words. A bond? A sacred bond? This was insane. "You're telling me that by looking at you, I'm now married to you? A princess I've never even met before? This is some kind of joke, right?" She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "Does it look like I'm joking?" Her eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, Dorian couldn't look away. There was a weight in her gaze, a deep sadness masked by her calm demeanor. You have no idea what this means for me, she continued, her voice low. For both of us. Dorian shook his head again, still reeling. I didn't sign up for this. I came here to sell an artifact. I'm not some pawn in whatever this is. I know why you came, Alyssa said, her tone suddenly much softer, almost sympathetic. The celestial orb, you think it's just a valuable trinket, a way to make a quick profit. But it's not. It's the key to something much greater. Great? Dorian scoffed. This artifact isn't some ancient relic tied to a prophecy. It's just a sphere, a glowing piece of crystal. Alyssa's smile was faint, almost knowing. It's much more than that. It's the key to undoing what's been done to me, what's been done to my people. Dorian raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? Alyssa sighed and walked over to a sleek holographic terminal in the corner of the room. She pressed a button and a map of the galaxy flickered to life before them, zooming in on a series of coordinates. Some centuries ago, she began, my ancestors tried to create a weapon, a biological weapon, something that would make us untouchable, but they failed, horribly. The experiment resulted in a curse, one that makes me appear monstrous to everyone except humans. She turned to face Dorian, her golden eyes shimmering with an emotion he couldn't quite place. The celestial orb can reverse the damage, but I can't do it alone. That's why I needed you. Dorian took a step back. So you planned all this, the bond, the artifact, you needed me to steal it. Yes, Alyssa said simply. I needed someone who could think on their feet, someone who would risk everything for the right cause. And now you've got the orb. You're already involved, whether you like it or not. Dorian felt a wave of frustration wash over him. This is insane. I just wanted to make a quick deal, get in and get out. Now I'm stuck in some intergalactic mess with a princess who thinks I'm her husband. What kind of trap is this? Alyssa took a step closer, her voice gentle but firm. This isn't a trap, Dorian. It's fate. It's a bond that can't be undone. You've seen me as I truly am, what others cannot see. I didn't want this, but now I can't escape it. Dorian's head spun. He had no choice but to go along with it, for now. But something inside him was stirring. Despite the confusion, despite the danger, he couldn't deny that there was something about Alyssa, something that kept him from running. All right, he said finally, his voice filled with reluctant resolve. Let's say I buy into your crazy story. What's the next step? What now? Alyssa smiled, her golden eyes glinting with a spark of something dangerous. Now we find the answers, together, and maybe, just maybe, we'll break this curse once and for all. Dorian leaned against the glass wall, staring at the stars beyond, trying to make sense of what Alyssa had just revealed. His mind was racing, trying to process everything, but the more he thought about it, the more tangled the situation became. There was no escaping this. He had made eye contact with her, looked at her, and now they were bound. His gaze flickered to Alyssa, who was standing by the terminal, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. She seemed calm, as if she had known all along how this would unfold. He couldn't help but wonder, had she planned this entire thing from the start? What exactly are you asking me to do? Dorian's voice broke the silence, his words laced with frustration. You've got me involved in some kind of intergalactic marriage, a curse, and now you want me to break this bond? Alyssa's golden eyes shift to meet his. I'm not asking you to break anything. I'm asking you to help me fix what was broken. This curse, it's not just a punishment for me. It's a punishment for my entire species. Dorian frowned, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was telling him. I'm no hero. I don't do saving people. I don't need saving, Alyssa said quietly. I need someone who sees me, truly sees me. That's why I chose you. Why me? Dorian asked, his skepticism clear. There must be others who could have done this. Alyssa took a step closer, her eyes narrowing slightly. You're different. You're human. My people were cursed to appear monstrous to everyone else, but you saw me and ran. No one else has ever done that. Most would have stayed, tried to use me, tried to manipulate, but you ran. Dorian scoffed. You think that was some kind of bravery? I ran because this whole thing makes no sense. I understand, Alyssa said, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. But it's the truth. The celestial orb you have, it's the key to undoing the damage done to my people. It's the only way to reverse the curse, and we're running out of time. Dorian stared at her, unsure of what to believe. He'd stolen the orb for a job, nothing more, nothing less. Now it seemed like he was caught in a web of political intrigue and ancient magic that he had no part in. But despite his hesitation, something inside him told him that Alyssa wasn't lying. She might be hiding things, but the core of her story rang true. "I don't even know where to begin," Dorian muttered, glancing at the map still displayed on the terminal. "How do we even find this place? And what's the plan once we get there?" Alyssa's smile returned, her confidence growing as she spoke. "We start with the coordinates. The orb will guide us. It has a specific resonance with my people's technology. Once we're there, we'll confront the source of the curse, my ancestors' research facility. It's the only place where we can reverse the quantum manipulation that created the curse." Dorian was silent for a moment, weighing his options. His instincts screamed at him to back out, to take the orb and run far away from this mess. But something about Alyssa's words, her determination, made him hesitate. She was right. This wasn't just about the orb anymore. It was about something bigger. And for reasons he couldn't quite explain, he felt compelled to see it through. "All right," Dorian said, his voice firming with resolve. "Let's say I help you with this. What happens after? I get the curse lifted, and then I'm free to go?" Alyssa nodded, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity. "Once the curse is lifted, we'll be free. You'll be free. And I'll finally be able to return to my people, no longer trapped in this illusion." Dorian let out a breath, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "This is insane," he muttered. "But fine, let's get this over with." Alyssa's smile softened, a glimmer of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you, Dorian. You don't know what this means to me." Before Dorian could respond, the room's door slid open with a soft hiss, and a figure stepped inside, a tall, imposing man with dark, shifting features. His presence was like a shadow falling over the room. "Princess Alyssa," the man said, his voice cold and commanding, "I must insist you reconsider your actions. The council will not stand for this." Dorian's hand instinctively went to the blaster hidden under his jacket, but Alyssa raised a hand to stop him. "Not now, Dorian," she said quietly. "This is Kian, my father's chief envoy. He's here to ensure I don't do anything foolish." Kian's eyes flicked to Dorian, then back to Alyssa. "You think you can simply defy the will of the Assembly? You've already gone too far. The orb, that artifact, it's dangerous. You're playing with forces you don't understand." Dorian straightened, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe you're right," he said coolly. "But if I'm going to help Alyssa, it's not going to be under the thumb of the Assembly or anyone else. This is between me and her. You have a problem with that?" Kian studied Dorian for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're a fool," Kian said finally, turning to Alyssa. "The consequences of your actions will be catastrophic. You cannot escape this." "We'll see about that," Alyssa replied, her voice unwavering. "You can tell my father that I'm doing this for my people, and nothing is going to stop me." Kian hesitated, then turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Dorian looked at Alyssa, sensing the tension in the air. "You've got a lot of enemies." Alyssa smiled, but there was no humor in it. "And they're only going to get more dangerous from here on out." The room fell into silence after Kian's departure. Alyssa remained still, her golden eyes glowing softly in the dim light. Dorian stood by the window, looking out into the vastness of space, though his mind was far from the stars. Every word Kian had spoken weighed heavily on him. The consequences will be catastrophic. He glanced back at Alyssa. She was pacing slowly, as if the threat of the entire galaxy collapsing around her was nothing more than an annoying inconvenience. "Do you always ignore people who threaten you?" Dorian asked, his tone tinged with disbelief. "You just let him walk out, as if he didn't just say your entire plan is about to destroy everything." Alyssa paused, her back still turned to him. "If I had the luxury of letting their words get to me, I wouldn't be here now, would I?" Her voice was calm but edged with the kind of tension that came from years of living on the edge. "You can't let them control you, Dorian. Not if we're going to succeed." "You're really set on this, aren't you?" Dorian asked, his arms crossed as he looked at her. "You're willing to risk it all, your people, your future, for a chance to break this curse. And you want me to play along?" Alyssa turned toward him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that nearly knocked the breath out of him. I don't want you to play along. I need you to. You're already part of this. Whether you realize it or not, you've already committed. Dorian's pulse quickened at her words. There was no way out now. His hand instinctively reached for the celestial orb, the weight of it suddenly more significant than ever. He had no idea what he was getting into, but he could feel it. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just a smuggler's job. You keep talking about breaking the curse, Dorian said, trying to clear the fog in his mind. But how do we even know the orb will work? What if it's just another dead end, another trick? Alyssa gave a small, humorless smile. I don't know if it will work, but I have to try. This curse has kept me from truly being who I am. It's held my people back for generations. I won't let it control me anymore. I will break it, and I need you to help me. The sincerity in her voice sent a chill down his spine. Despite everything, the danger, the lies, the uncertainty, there was something real there, a desperate hope, a yearning for freedom that mirrored his own in a way. Before Dorian could respond, the room's door opened again, this time with more urgency. A group of armed figures in sleek black armor stormed inside, weapons raised. Dorian's instincts kicked in, and his hand went to his blaster, but Alyssa was already moving, quick and graceful as always. No need for that, she said, holding up a hand to calm Dorian. These are my guards. The leader of the group, a tall man with piercing blue eyes, stepped forward. Princess Alyssa, he said, bowing slightly. We've been ordered to escort you to the council chamber immediately. Your presence is required. Of course it is, Alyssa replied coolly, not even flinching. Lead the way, Jalen. Dorian shot her a glance, wondering if she was playing a game he didn't understand. Alyssa motioned for him to follow, and they exited the room, the guards flanking them on either side. As they walked down the sleek, metallic corridors of the ship, Dorian couldn't help but feel like they were walking straight into the lion's den. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the guards' silent presence only added to the unease. It wasn't long before they arrived at a large, imposing door, its surface covered in intricate symbols Dorian didn't recognize. This is it, Alyssa said quietly, her voice low and filled with a quiet resolve. The Thirian Assembly. Dorian raised an eyebrow, unsure of what to expect. Aren't we going to talk about how you plan to deal with them? They look like they're ready to shoot first and ask questions later. Alyssa turned to him, her expression unreadable. Don't worry, Dorian. I've handled them before, but you might want to stay out of the way when things get heated. Before Dorian could ask more, the doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a vast chamber filled with towering figures seated around a long, circular table. Each one was a member of the Thirian Assembly, and their presence alone sent a wave of unease through Dorian. The air was thick with authority, and the room hummed with quiet power. At the head of the table sat a tall, regal figure, Alyssa's father. His face was a shifting mosaic of faces, each one more terrifying than the last, as though his very form was unstable. This was the leader of the Thirian people, the one whose judgment would decide their fates. Alyssa stepped forward, her voice firm as she addressed the assembly. I have returned to end the curse. I will no longer hide in the shadows of my people's failure. There was a moment of silence, then one of the members, an elderly figure with skin like obsidian, spoke up. You defy the laws of our ancestors, Alyssa. The curse cannot be undone by just any means. You risk not only your life, but the entire future of the Thirian people. Alyssa stood tall, unflinching. I understand the risks, but I will not live in fear of something that was never meant to be. The orb is the key. I will use it to break the curse. The room erupted into murmurs. Dorian stood behind her, unsure of what to make of the intense scrutiny the assembly was placing on them. He didn't belong here, not in this world of politics and ancient customs, but for some reason, he couldn't tear himself away. Alyssa, her father's voice rumbled, his multiple faces shifting in a disturbing way. You are our last hope, but you will not act alone. The consequences of this decision could mean war. Alyssa's gaze never wavered. Then let it come. I will fight for my freedom and for the freedom of my people. The room fell into silence once again, the tension palpable as Alyssa stood unwavering before her father and the assembly. Dorian remained on the sidelines, feeling more like an intruder in a world he didn't understand. Every inch of this place, from the cold stone walls to the ever-shifting faces of the assembly members, seemed to pulse with centuries of power. It was a place where rules weren't just followed, they were enforced. And Alyssa had just broken one of them. Alyssa's father, the leader of the Tharian people, finally spoke, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to echo through the very air. "You have defied the core of our traditions, Alyssa. You would risk everything, the future of our people, the stability of our kingdom, for a fleeting hope. You don't even know if this orb will work. You're willing to gamble it all." "I'm not gambling anything," Alyssa replied, her voice fierce. "I'm choosing to take control of my own fate, and I will not let a curse control me or my people for one more day. The orb is the key. I know it is." Her father's eyes narrowed, shifting between his various faces, the expressions flickering as if to analyze her words. "This is not a game, Alyssa. We've spent centuries trying to preserve the balance. If you break it, there will be no going back. You risk war with the other species, with the council, with everyone." Dorian couldn't help but step forward, unable to remain silent any longer. "Then let it come," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "If your people have been living under this curse for centuries, maybe it's time to risk everything for a chance at freedom. What's the point of a kingdom built on lies and fear? If Alyssa says this is the way, then I believe her." The room grew deathly quiet. Every eye in the chamber turned toward Dorian, who felt the weight of their stares, the gravity of his words hitting him all at once. He didn't belong here. He wasn't part of their world. But something about Alyssa, something about her conviction, made him feel like this was more than just a job, more than just a deal gone wrong. Alyssa's father's shifting faces settled into one form, regal, yet somehow filled with a quiet fury. "You dare to speak against the will of the assembly?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You are no more than a criminal, a smuggler. What right do you have to interfere in matters that have shaped our world for millennia?" "I've seen enough of what happens when people stay silent," Dorian shot back, his voice rising. "You've been hiding from the truth for too long. This curse is a prison, your prison. I'm not afraid to stand with her, whether you like it or not." The tension in the room became almost unbearable, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Alyssa stepped forward, standing beside Dorian, her eyes locked on her father's. "I am the princess of this kingdom, and I will choose my path," Alyssa said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet power. "I've seen what this curse has done to my people. I've seen how it's kept us in the shadows. We deserve to live freely, and I will not let anyone, not even you, stand in the way of that." Her father's eyes flickered in recognition, and for a brief moment there was something else in his gaze, a flicker of doubt. But it was gone before Dorian could fully process it. "Very well," the Therian leader said, his voice filled with reluctant acceptance. "You will have your chance. But understand this, Alyssa, the consequences will be dire, and you will not have the support of the assembly. You and your husband will face the consequences alone." Dorian's stomach tightened at the word husband. He still wasn't used to hearing it. It sounded so final, so permanent. But despite the weight of it, something inside him refused to back down. If this was the price of freedom for both him and Alyssa, then he'd pay it. Alyssa didn't flinch. "I'm ready," she said, her voice filled with quiet defiance. "Let it come." The leader of the assembly nodded, and the members began to rise, their faces filled with a mixture of contempt and resignation. They had made their decision, and now it was up to Alyssa and Dorian to prove them wrong, to prove that they could break the curse and change everything. As the assembly exited the room, Dorian turned to Alyssa, his mind still spinning. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" he asked, his voice low. Alyssa looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "There's no turning back now, Dorian. We either break the curse, or we lose everything." Dorian nodded slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the celestial orb at his side. "Then let's make sure we don't fail." The two of them stood in the center of the chamber, the weight of their decision settling over them like a storm cloud. They were about to embark on a journey that would test everything, everything they believed in, everything they feared. The road ahead was uncertain, and the consequences were more than either of them could fully comprehend. But for the first time, Dorian felt like they were on the cusp of something real, something bigger than both of them. The heavy doors of the assembly chamber slid shut behind them, and the echoes of the confrontation slowly faded into the cold silence of the hallway. Dorian's heart was still racing, the tension of the moment weighing on him like a heavy cloak. He and Alyssa stood alone now, the path ahead uncertain, the stakes higher than ever. But despite the fear gnawing at him, there was also a sense of resolve building inside him. He couldn't just turn back. Alyssa turned to him, her face still unreadable. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice steady, yet there was an urgency behind it. "Once the assembly sends word to the council, they'll mobilize. They won't let us get away with this. We have to move quickly." Dorian nodded, trying to push aside the swirl of thoughts in his mind. "All right, so where do we go from here? The orb is the key, right? How do we use it?" Alyssa's eyes flashed with determination. "The orb will lead us. It's not just a physical object. It's a part of the technology my ancestors created. It contains a resonance, a frequency that matches the quantum signature of my people. We need to take it to the ruins of the old research facility. It's hidden in the heart of the Virelan system, in a place known as the Shattered Ring." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "Shattered Ring? Sounds like a place you go to die." Alyssa gave a wry smile, but there was no humor in it. "Not if we get there first. The ring was the site of the original experiment that caused the curse. It's dangerous, yes, but it's the only place where we can reverse the damage. We just have to hope the orb still works the way it was intended." "Great," Dorian muttered. "So we're going into a ruin filled with ancient tech and possibly a few dozen hostile forces, and we're counting on some ancient artifact to undo centuries of genetic manipulation. What's the worst that could happen?" Alyssa's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Dorian saw the flicker of something raw, something human. "The worst," she said softly, "is that we fail. And if we fail, my people will never be free." Dorian couldn't argue with that. He didn't care about politics or ancient curses, but the thought of being tied to this fight to her kept him rooted in this moment. "We're doing this," he said, his voice more certain than he felt. "Let's go find this ring and make sure it's not the end of us." Without another word, they turned and headed toward the docking bay, where their ship awaited. Dorian's thoughts kept drifting back to the strange bond between them. Every glance, every word, felt heavier now. There was something about Alyssa, something beyond the danger, beyond the curse, that made him want to stand beside her, even if it meant walking straight into the fire. As they boarded the ship, a sleek and advanced vessel with weapon systems far beyond anything Dorian had ever seen, Alyssa immediately moved to the navigation console. Her fingers flew over the controls, inputting the coordinates that would take them to the Shattered Ring. "You ready for this?" she asked, glancing up at him. "I'm not sure I'll ever be ready for this," Dorian replied, buckling himself into the co-pilot's seat. "But we don't have a choice, do we?" Alyssa smiled, a brief flash of something warm in her eyes. "No, we don't." The engines roared to life as the ship powered up, and the stars outside the viewport stretched into bright streaks as they entered hyperspace. The journey ahead was treacherous, and both of them knew it. The closer they got to their destination, the more they would have to face. Not just the dangers of the Shattered Ring, but the ones they had brought upon themselves by defying the assembly. "Whatever happens," Dorian said after a long pause, "I just want to know one thing. Why me? Why did you pick me for this?" Alyssa was silent for a moment, her gaze focused on the stars beyond. "You're the first person in a long time who didn't see me as a monster. You didn't try to use me. You ran because it scared you, and that's what made you different." Dorian shook his head. "That's not a compliment. Running was all I knew how to do." "It's more than that," she insisted, her voice soft. "You saw me, Dorian. Even if it was just for a moment, you saw beyond what everyone else saw. And that's why I chose you." His heart skipped a beat. "I'm not sure I'm ready to be someone's hero." "You're not a hero," Alyssa said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But you're exactly who I need." The ship jolted suddenly, as if something had brushed against it, a warning that their time was running out. Dorian's grip tightened on his seat. Alyssa's eyes darted to the console. The readings were off. Someone or something was out there. "We're not alone," she said, her voice hardening with urgency. "They're coming for us." Dorian quickly strapped in, his hand hovering near his blaster. "How many?" Alyssa didn't answer. She didn't need to. The ship's external scanners were already blaring with the signature of multiple vessels closing in fast. "This is going to be one hell of a ride," Dorian muttered, his fingers tightening around the control lever. Alyssa's smile flickered, her golden eyes flashing with resolve. "Then let's make sure we're the ones who come out on top." The ship lurched forward, breaking through the atmosphere with a force that pressed them into their seats. The stars outside twisted into streaks as they entered hyperspace. But it wasn't the familiar hum of the engines that filled the air. It was the growing tension, the undeniable feeling that something big was on the horizon. Alyssa sat at the console, her fingers flying over the controls, while Dorian kept a wary eye on the scanner. They were nearing the shattered ring, and with every passing second, the sense of urgency grew. "They're getting closer," Dorian muttered, eyes scanning the radar. "We don't have much time before we hit the ring." Alyssa's voice was focused, but there was an edge of determination beneath it. "We won't be able to outrun them forever. We'll need to fight. The orb can guide us, but we'll need to trust each other. There's no turning back." Dorian gripped the armrests, his pulse quickening. "This is insane. We're about to crash into a research facility in the middle of nowhere, with bounty hunters and hostile forces on our tail, all because you believe that orb is going to undo centuries of curse. You're putting everything on the line for something you can't even fully control." Alyssa turned to face him, her golden eyes catching the faint light from the console. "I'm not doing this just for me. I'm doing it for my people, for the freedom we've never had, and for you. You could have walked away, Dorian, but you didn't. That's why I believe in this in us." Dorian felt a flicker of something deep inside, something he couldn't ignore. Despite all the danger, the uncertainty, there was a part of him that wasn't running anymore. A part that was beginning to trust her words, trust the bond that had formed between them, whether by chance or fate. Then the ship jolted, a sudden explosion of force that sent them both flying against their harnesses. The lights flickered as alarms blared, and Dorian's stomach lurched. "They've hit us!" Alyssa shouted over the roar of the systems. "Brace yourself!" The ship plunged into a spiral, the view outside now a blur of stars and chaos. Dorian could hear the sound of enemy fire, and the pressure building in his chest was nearly unbearable. But in the midst of the panic, Alyssa didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed as she pulled herself back into control. "Dorian, the ring is just ahead. We can make it. Hold on." As the ship lurched again, Dorian reached for the orb, now glowing with an otherworldly light, almost pulsing with energy. It was the key, the only thing that could break the curse and end this madness. He gripped it tightly, feeling its power hum through his fingers. The ship broke through the last of the debris fields surrounding the ring, and there it was, an ancient structure, half destroyed but still standing, like a relic of a lost time. The shattered ring. They had made it. But just as they approached the research facility's entrance, a dark shadow fell over the ship, a fleet of enemy vessels closing in on them. Their weapons fired in unison, sending a series of explosive impacts that shook the hull. Alyssa's voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it. "We don't have time to fight. We have to get to the facility now!" With a final burst of speed, the ship shot through the entrance of the facility, narrowly avoiding the pursuing fire. The station's dark corridors opened before them, and the sounds of enemy ships faded as they entered the heart of the ancient structure. Dorian glanced over at Alyssa, who was watching the orb with a determined look on her face. "This is it," she said softly. "Everything comes down to this moment." They both knew that once they entered the depths of the facility, there would be no turning back. The secrets of the orb, the curse, and the fate of her people were all contained within those walls. But as they approached the central chamber, a strange feeling settled over Dorian, a feeling of both dread and hope. The orb began to glow brighter, almost blindingly so, as it resonated with the ancient technology around them. The air crackled with energy, and the facility seemed to come alive in a way that made Dorian's heart race. "This is it," Alyssa whispered, her voice full of awe and fear. "We've unlocked it. The answer is here. Just as the orb was about to make contact with the central device, a loud explosion echoed through the facility, and the walls trembled. A voice crackled through the comms, cold, malicious. "Alyssa," the voice said, "you've gone too far. You think you can undo what has been done? You think you can break the curse with this relic? You're wrong." Dorian's heart skipped a beat as he realized who it was. It was Kian, the one who had warned them, the one who had tried to stop them. And he was here, in the heart of the facility, waiting for them. The orb pulsed once more, sending a shockwave of energy through the room. The walls began to crack, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Dorian knew one thing for sure. The final moment had come. "Get ready, Dorian," Alyssa said, her hand tightening around his. "This is the moment where everything changes." But as the room began to collapse around them, and the final battle loomed before them, the orb unleashed its power in a brilliant flash of light, and everything went dark. When Dorian's eyes opened again, the world around him was silent. The bright, blinding light of the orb was gone, replaced by the eerie quiet of a shattered facility. The walls were cracked, the equipment in ruins, but there was something different. Something had changed. Alyssa was standing beside him, her eyes wide, her hand still gripping his. She looked different, more real, somehow. The curse was gone. The strange, shifting appearance that had always haunted her was no more. But as Dorian opened his mouth to speak, to ask what had happened, a voice echoed from the shadows. Well, it seems you've made it this far after all." Kian stepped into the light, his form no longer shifting. His features were sharp, his expression unreadable. But this time, there was no anger in his voice, only curiosity. Dorian's heart raced. What did you do?" Kian's smile was slow, knowing. "You've broken the curse, Alyssa, but now there's a new game to play, and it's one neither of you expected." As the words hung in the air, Dorian and Alyssa exchanged a look that spoke volumes of everything they had been through, everything they had fought for. They had no idea what the future held, or what Kian's words meant, but one thing was certain: they had only just begun.